Hello world and welcome to my channel. My name is Jeff and I am that French horror guy. Today we continue exploring my Slasher Movies Iceberg. This video is part 2 and we're still in tier 1. Just a quick reminder before we start to please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing and all that stuff if you like my work. This will help grow the channel. Thank you for being here, you're much welcome, make yourself comfortable, and with that being said, let's dive into my Slasher Movies Iceberg, Part 2. To kick off the second part of our iceberg, let's talk about Prom Night, which came out in 1980. Prom Night is a Canadian film that premiered shortly after the success of John Carpenter's Halloween and around the same time as Friday the 13th. Because of this, it's regarded as another quintessential movie of the early days of the slasher genre. The film is based on a story by Robert Goodser Jr. and was written by William Gray. Production was quickly launched after director Paul Lynch and producer Peter Simpson made a deal in 1979 for a co-production between the United States and Canada, which was a popular tax shelter for filmmakers at the time. With a budget of $1.5 million, filming then took place in Toronto, Ontario, Canada in late 1979. Prom Night starts with a flashback where 4 kids, while playing in an old school, accidentally cause the death of one of their friends by scaring her out a window. Fast forward 6 years and the kids are now in high school, preparing for their senior prom. Little do they know, someone witnessed their terrible act and is now out for revenge on that very same prom night. One of the film's biggest assets is definitely the casting of Jamie Lee Curtis, who had just earned the title of Scream Queen after Halloween's massive success. She would eventually go on to appear in several more slasher films in the years to come, which we will meet later in this list. Alongside Jamie Lee Curtis, the film also features Leslie Nielsen, who was still known as a serious actor at the time, as the Naked Gun series hadn't been released yet. However, horror fans recognized him from his role in the classic Forbidden Planet from 1956. Even though Prom Night follows a straightforward plot, it surprisingly offers intricate character development, which is not something you typically see in slasher films. Jamie Lee Curtis shines with a strong performance that showcases her acting skills. The film also creates a captivating atmosphere reminiscent of classics like Suspiria and Carrie, thanks to the remarkable work of cinematographer Robert New, and includes some suspenseful stalking sequences. Regarding the murder scenes, director Lynch opted for a more realistic approach instead of going over the top with gore, which makes them feel more impactful. Additionally, we can't overlook the musical score by Paul Zaza. Originally, the production wanted to use popular disco songs, but because of high licensing fees, they ended up creating original music in an astonishingly short amount of time of only 5 days. Prom Night is a prime example of early slasher films and can be seen as a trailblazer for themes that would later become significant in the genre, such as the traumatic childhood incident, the haunting secret, and even the gender confusion of the killer. The film ultimately succeeded at the box office, grossing nearly $15 million, and after that found a strong following on home video, earning over time its status as a honest minor classic. Next, at the 7th place of the list, we find another Canadian production, My Bloody Valentine, released in 1981. Upon its initial development, My Bloody Valentine offered all the signs of an incoming disaster. With Paramount Pictures pushing for a speedy production to capitalize on the success of Friday the 13th, the film was rushed into production without a completed script, all to ensure it could premiere on February 14th, 1981. So, how did it finally end up becoming one of the most cherished slasher films ever? In the small Canadian mining town of Valentine Bluffs, the locals are gearing up for a Valentine's Day celebration. However, some people in town are nervous because the last time they held such a party, a crazed miner with a pickaxe caused a massacre. It's been nearly 20 years since they last celebrated, and as February 14th approaches, it seems like the day is cursed. To make matters worse, the biggest Valentine's party is set to take place right by the entrance of the town's coal mine. The project was initiated by the Canadian production company Cinepix, known for its earlier collaborations with David Cronenberg on such films as Shivers 1975 and Rabid 1977. Based on a concept by Stephen Miller, director George Mihalka and screenwriter John Beard were subsequently brought on board to refine the story, working closely together, even as filming had to start hastily in mid-September 1980, following Paramount's decision to distribute the film on a wide scale for Valentine's Day 1981. Mihalka and Beard intentionally crafted the film to diverge from the conventional slasher tropes of the era, opting for a mining town setting rather than the typical youth camp or suburban backdrop, and featuring working-class young adults instead of teenagers. Beard later remarked that their goal was to create the Deer Hunter of horror movies, which is quite accurate. My Bloody Valentine effectively develops compelling characters who resonate as authentic, and their interactions are believable and rich, with a welcome touch of humor that renders them immediately likable. Shot on location in Nova Scotia's Sydney's mines in Canada, the film is rooted in a tough reality that keeps everything authentic. And when the third act begins and the party moves into the mines, cinematographer Rodney Gibbons perfectly captures the spooky and claustrophobic vibes of the caves, while director George Mihalka surpasses expectations with his solid visual storytelling. Another distinguishing feature of the film is its killer, who, clad in a miner's attire, with a gas mask obscuring his face and wielding a menacing pickaxe, presents a formidable threat. The atmospheric synth score further enhances the film's mood, a score composed by yet again Paul Zaza, whom we just met one film ago on Prom night. The murders in the film are particularly noteworthy, as they are not only convincingly executed, but also more intricate and gruesome than your typical slasher. Sadly, My Bloody Valentine is also renowned for having been heavily butchered by the MPAA upon its release, resulting in a shocking 9 minutes being cut, which removed some of the most impressive special effects created by makeup artist Tom Berman. It took nearly 30 years for audiences to finally see a version that was closer to the original. Ultimately, My Bloody Valentine, with its authenticity, its generosity, its solid construction, and its atmosphere, has endured the test of time, firmly securing its position within the horror cinema as one of the finest achievements in the slasher genre. Next on the list is another American-Canadian co-production, The Burning, which came out in 1981. But first, a little disclaimer. It's gonna be hard to talk about this movie, as one of the people who were at the core of its creation has been since convinced to be a literal piece of shit. So I won't name them in the video, I will just call them W. The Burning began as the very first project by the W brothers through their newly established production company, which would eventually become Miramax. Based on a story created by H.W., Brad Gray, and Tony Maylam, the screenplay was then penned in a very short amount of time by brother B.W. and writer Peter Lawrence, so they could ride the wave of the slasher movie craze of the time. Tony Maylam, who had previously found success with music documentaries, was brought on as the director as well. With a budget estimated at $1.5 million, they filmed on location at actual summer camps in New York during the late summer of 1980. The movie begins at Camp Blackfoot, a summer camp in upstate New York. Years ago, a crude prank gone wrong resulted in a caretaker named Cropsey, played by actor Lou David, being horrifically burned and disfigured. Several years later, Cropsey is released from hospital and comes back at the camp to seek revenge against those responsible for his gruesome injuries. The Burning obviously follows the narrative of every early slasher films, featuring a group of teenagers in a youth camp being stalked and killed by an unseen assailant. However, Tony Maylam and his cinematographer Harvey Harrison succeed in creating a captivating atmosphere in the woods where the film was shot, delivering some genuinely tense moments when the story calls for it. The movie also keeps viewers engaged during the necessary character development phase, as the young actors seems to be having just as much fun on set as we do watching them, making their characters likable and their interactions fun and lively. On that very same topic, on top of launching Miramax into the film industry, the movie is quite famous for featuring a remarkable lineup of young actors in their first roles, many of whom would go on to have impressive careers in the years after. Among them are Jason Alexander, Ned Eisenberg, Fisher Stevens, and a very brief appearance of Holly Hunter. Despite its unremarkable storyline, The Burning nonetheless offers a unique perspective on its villain. Viewers find themselves rooting for Cropsey after witnessing his tough start, which isn't something you see in many similar films. However, the sympathy doesn't last long, as his rampage turns out to be incredibly brutal, something the movie is well known for also, especially through the work of legendary special effect artist Tom Savini, who actually turned down Friday the 13th Part 2 to work on The Burning. Guiding Cropsey's iconic garden shears through the infamous Raft massacre scene, he delivers some of his most gruesome work, which will later lead him to say that he felt at the time like a serial killer, as he was hired in a number of movies one after the others, where he would have to kill innocent teenagers in the most graphic ways he could. The murder scenes are also enhanced by the chilling score from Yes keyboardist Rick Wakeman, which really amps up the suspense. When it was released in May 1981, The Burning, like many fellow movies of its era, faced harsh scrutiny from the MPAA and had to be heavily trimmed down to secure an R rating. Its career in theaters unfortunately wasn't successful, but despite this rocky start, the film eventually became a huge success and a staple on home video. With its solid pacing, likable characters and memorable murder scenes, The Burning has since earned its place as a flagship of the early slasher genre, as well as a well-deserved cult classic status. For our next guest in the iceberg, get ready to dive deep into the sewers of New York City in the early 80s, as we have Maniac, released in 1980. This one is a heavy hitter, definitely not for the faint of heart. Let's start with the storyline. In the cold winter nights of New York City lurks a brutal psycho killer named Frank Zito, played by the late great Joe Spinell, who was abused by his late mother yet still worships her. He stalks and kills young women and takes their scalps as trophies. One day he meets Anna, portrayed by the absolutely gorgeous Caroline Munro. Moving on. So, one day he meets Anna, a photographer, and befriends her. Is she the one who will help him put his life back on track? By the late 1970s, New York-born William Lustig, after having directed 2 adult films, is looking to make a more serious film when he meets actor Joe Spinell, who at the time had already worked with prestigious names such as Francis Ford Coppola on The Godfather 1 and 2 in 1972 and 1974, Martin Scorsese on Taxi Driver in 1976, Sylvester Stallone on Rocky 1 and 2 in 1976 and 1979, William Peter Blatty on The Ninth Configuration in 1980, and William Friedkin on Cruising also in 1980. Back then, the horror genre had gained a huge popularity, and the news was packed with chilling tales of real-life serial killers like Ted Bundy, John Wayne Gacy, and David Berkowitz, and this served as inspiration for Joe Spinell, who wrote the screenplay in collaboration with C.A. Rosenberg. According to IMDb, the microscopic budget of $350,000 first consisted of Joe Spinell's salary from Cruising, as well as William Lustig and his associate producer Andrew Garoni's profits from their previous adult films. It is said also that legendary Italian director Dario Argento was interested in producing, as his then wife Daria Nicolodi was going to play the role of Anna, before pulling out when Nicolodi finally couldn't be available for the shooting. Then British producer Judd Hamilton came up with the rest of the money, with the condition that the part of Anna would go to his then wife Caroline Munro, who had previously starred in The Golden Voyage of Sinbad in 1973, the 1977 James Bond flick The Spy Who Loved Me, and the wonderfully cheesy Luigi Cozzi's Star Crash in 1978, where she already worked with Joe Spinell. Filming took place during the winter of 1979-1980 under harsh conditions. The team would shoot without permit in New York City's most sleazy parts in a guerrilla-style production that ultimately gave the movie its gritty tone. To create the murder scenes in the best way possible, William Lustig made a smart choice by bringing in the king of splatter himself, once again Mr. Tom Savini, to handle the effects. The result is clear, as the killings in Maniac are some of the most intense and shocking ever captured on film. Even Savini admitted later that he might have gone a bit too far in some parts. When it was time, William Lustig didn't even bother to submit his movie to the MPAA, knowing very well that he couldn't avoid an X rating, and Maniac was then released unrated, because, ironically, it was easier for an unrated movie to be shown in theaters with a warning than an X-rated one, which would have been incorrectly mistaken for an adult film. Maniac is ultimately a genuinely intense shocker, dark and bleak. Its realism, its authenticity, the violence of its murder scenes, its disturbing main character, all come together perfectly to create a memorable and strong experience of cinema. Joe Spinell is especially brilliant in the role of Frank Zito, switching from a ruthless and violent murderer to a vulnerable, weeping child. And his character actually shares quite a lot of similarities with the Norman Bates from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, the dead abusing mother, the split personality, the loneliness. Unlike the typical slasher films of its era, and despite its shoestring budget, Maniac stands out as a carefully crafted work by William Lustig. The direction is tight and precise, leading to a powerful movie filled with memorable scenes, such as the chase in the subway, which has become iconic over time. Finally, the atmosphere of the movie is greatly enhanced by its score, written by Jay Chataway, switching from electronic ambient noises to a heavy and evocative soundtrack. Maniac had a tough time when it first came out, mainly because of its graphic violence, but there were also accusations that the film sympathized with its murderer. This led to a fierce debate and a media controversy.
I think that it is shocking and it contributes to the injury of women.
In the UK, on top of putting it in the infamous video nasty list, the film was downright banned until 2002, and even then a real uncut version wasn't available until 2022. From the beginning, William Lustig and Joe Spinell were committed to making their film as ruthless and uncompromising as possible, and they definitely succeeded. While Maniac may not be for everyone, it's hard to deny that, similarly to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's a brilliant and significant piece of cinema, as well as a gritty and brutally honest masterpiece. Our next movie, at the 10th place of the iceberg, is Silent Night, Deadly Night, which came out in 1984. The genesis of the film consists of a story written by Paul Kamey, originally titled He Sees You When You're Sleeping, which caught the attention of producers Scott Schneid and Dennis Whitehead. They brought in writer Michael Hickey to adapt it into a screenplay, but it is said that the only element that made it into the final version was the concept of a killer Santa Claus. Back then, the slasher genre was at its heyday, and TriStar Pictures agreed to finance and distribute the film, allowing it a rather nice $750,000 budget. However, they insisted on hiring Charles Sellier as the director, even though it would be his very first feature film, and despite the fact that he moreover seemed to literally dislike the genre. Nevertheless, principal photography then took place in Utah during the spring of 1983 under the working title of Sleigh Ride. Sadly, it quickly became clear that the director was not comfortable with the material, as he outright refused to film the murder scenes, which ended up being handled by the movie's editor, Michael Spence. Silent Night, Deadly Night begins in 1971 with 5-year-old Billy, who witnesses the murder of his parents by a killer in a Santa Claus suit. 3 years later, and he's stuck in a strict orphanage run by nuns. When Christmas comes around, he is forced to sit on the lap of a Santa impersonator, which only deepens his trauma. By 1984, Billy is 18 and finally leaves the orphanage, hoping to lead a normal life. He finds work in a toy store, but when he is forced to dress as a Santa, he snaps and goes on a wild killing spree, still wearing the Santa Claus outfit. The concept of a killer Santa was not entirely unprecedented when the film hit theaters. There already was a segment in the horror anthology film Tales from the Crypt, directed by Freddie Francis and released in 1972, and even a feature film in 1980 titled Christmas Evil, which we will meet later in the Iceberg, directed by Lewis Jackson. However, it was Silent Night, Deadly Night that sparked a huge controversy upon its release, mainly because of its advertising that focused on the Killer Santa theme. A group calling themselves Mothers Against Movie Madness organized protests outside the theaters that showed the movie, but it was the Parent-Teacher Association that really took the lead in the media backlash, to such an extent that TriStar pulled the movie off theaters only in the second week of its release.
Rob, when Silent Night, Deadly Night was first released, many parents were shocked that a movie about a maniacal Santa Claus would be shown at Christmas time.
In May 1985, Silent Night, Deadly Night was re-released anyway by an independent company named Aquarius Films, complete with a new ad campaign and some minor edits, but unfortunately it still flopped at the box office. Oh, and I don't think I have to mention it, but of course, the movie was blacklisted as a video nasty in the UK. Silent Night, Deadly Night, likely due to its director's indifference to the horror genre, spent a good amount of time fleshing out its characters, which leads to a lengthy exploration of Billy's traumatic backstory and his gradual descent into madness. And this approach surprisingly turned out to work extremely well, allowing viewers to connect with the main character. First-time actor Robert Brian Wilson does a brilliant job in portraying Billy, depicting him as a vulnerable and confused individual instead of an over-the-top, eye-rolling, crazed maniac, making his casting one of the film's standout features. Billy's Rampage has its share of memorable moments as well, like the infamous sled decapitation scene, or the creative use of deer antlers in the death scene of the character played by legendary scream queen Linnea Quigley, who, in true form, meets her end while naked. The movie actually doesn't take itself seriously and is delightfully silly at times, as demonstrated by the scenes with the grandpa played by an hilarious Will Hare. Or when Billy, being taken for a genuine mall Santa, whispers quiet threats to an irritable little girl, scaring her into silence. While not being a genuine scary movie, nor a striking example of filmmaking, Silent Night Deadly Night is still a silly, sleazy, and definitely entertaining little treasure.
You see Santa Claus tonight? You better run, boy. You better run for your life.
If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching my video. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting. This will help grow the channel. My name is Jeff, I am that French horror guy, and I will see you hopefully in the next part of my Slasher Movies Iceberg. Until then, goodbye.